Welcome to the Diligent Woman Podcast, where Christian women let go of their guilt and step out in confidence by bringing God into every part of the day, learning by examples in Scripture, applying simple principles, and trusting the Lord with it all. I am Angela Legg of thediligentwoman.com, and I welcome you to grow in grace and truth one step at a time. Let's get started. Welcome to the Diligent Woman Podcast. I am Angela, the Diligent Woman from thediligentwoman.com. And you are joining us right at about, we're halfway through our Season 2 Bible study on the woman in Proverbs 31 from a different perspective. We are trying to find this woman in each of us rather than seeing her as necessarily a ladder we're supposed to climb, something we're supposed to achieve. We've been looking at how all of these characteristics that she has are ones that can be found in women who are single and married. The woman in Proverbs 31 being married is not what made her a woman of valor. In the description given, it was how she lived out being a woman of valor. It's the circumstances that she lived through and showed how to be a woman of valor in her circumstances. If you go back to the earlier episodes of the season, you will find that we define that woman of valor and how that is not unique to this woman. It's just that she is giving us a picture of that. And we also look at the fact that the description is given to a young man who doesn't have a wife by his mother to give him a list, an idea, I guess, of a way to find a woman and what kind of woman to get. And we're assuming that she wasn't trying to get him to take someone else's wife, but rather find a single woman who would be like this woman in marriage. Excuse me. So, we're now jumping into, we've spent the last 6 episodes. First one, defining woman of valor. Second one, talking about single women in Scripture in general, God's attitude about single women. And then we looked at some examples of single women who reflected this Proverbs 31 woman for us, who gave us a picture of what this looks like and the different personalities that are shown. Now, they're not all exactly the same, yet all of them show us a woman who fears the Lord. Now we are going to dive into the second part of our season, and we're going to look at married women. This is the more obvious one because the description of the woman in Proverbs 31 is married. So we have an easier time probably seeing these characteristics in the women we're going to look at. But I want to go back to a couple of references that we did look at in our single women conversations. We looked over in Luke chapter 10 with Mary and Martha being distracted by all of her preparations, and Jesus telling her that she is very distracted, but that Mary has chosen a good thing, that there is only one thing that is necessary, and that's what Mary had chosen. It wasn't that Martha, in needing to do all the preparations, was doing something wrong. Really, the problem in that instance was that she wanted to take Mary away from something that was better. So that's the admonition that Jesus gives to her. It wasn't that don't do that, it's that this is a thing to do if you have to choose. And then if we go back to 1 Corinthians 7, where we spent some time when we were looking at single women in general in episode 2, back then we were showing God's attitude about being single. Paul's attitude specifically, but how he believed he had the Lord and there was wisdom here, and he is showing what he believes to be better, especially in a time where trouble might be coming. He's talking to the Corinthians. They're anticipating persecution, and there's been questions about how do I handle the relationships that I'm in now that I'm a Christian and these things are going to change. Do I need to change my circumstances? And in verses 17 through 20 really kind of sums up the chapter. Just everything around it is giving examples. Paul says, only as the Lord has assigned to each one, as God has called each, in this manner let him walk. And so I direct in all the churches. Was any man called when he was already circumcised? He is not to become uncircumcised. Has anyone been called in uncircumcision? He's not to be circumcised. This question gets covered quite a bit throughout the book of Acts. And you see it here in the individual churches where this question from the Jews who were circumcised versus the non-Jews who are coming into the church and those who believe that they needed to be physically circumcised. And it said, no, that is something that is of the law of Moses. It was for a time. It is not now. Circumcision is of the heart. And so just in the same way that if you came to the Lord and you were a Jew and were already circumcised, you can't undo that. You don't need to think about trying to undo that. And if you came to the Lord and became a Christian and you were not circumcised because you were a Gentile, you don't now need to change that about yourself either. And then he says, circumcision is nothing and uncircumcision is nothing, but what matters is the keeping of the commandments of God. Each man must remain in that condition in which he was called. And then he goes on in the next few verses to talk about being called as a slave. Were you called as a slave? Well, you can still be a slave and be a Christian. We've got the whole book of Philemon that deals specifically with that. Philemon is a Christian and he owns a slave named Onesimus. And Paul would love for Onesimus had run away and he came and he met Paul and you get the impression he's obeyed the gospel and he's been a help to Paul and Paul wants him to stay with him, but he knows his place is back with Philemon and he sends a letter to Philemon asking if he chooses to do so, would he be willing to part with Onesimus because he would be a great encouragement to Paul. But he's a slave, Onesimus is, and Philemon owns him in the way that society worked. But as Christians, they were equals. Being obedient to God took away the stigma, let's say, of those relationships. You could still be in those positions, and it really didn't mean anything because you are equal to one another in the Lord. It's not any different than having a boss and you being an employee, and the fact that they have function in one role and you have function in another role. And Paul just goes into a lot of detail here to help them see that it's not your place, it's not what you were doing when you became a Christian that makes you valuable, nor is it that what position you were in that keeps you from being valuable to God. You need to just stay where you are. And he goes on, and in part of this he talks about if you're single, stay single. Going to be easier. That's his opinion. He thinks you'll be happier. You don't need to worry about it. Dads don't need to worry about marrying off your virgin daughters because she'll have a better time if she just stays as she is and focuses on serving the Lord, because this is going to get muddy. People are going to come at you. People are going to chase you. You're going to be persecuted. You don't need to make it complicated. But he tells those who are married, you need to stay married. And those who got married and their spouse didn't, they're married, sorry, they were married, they became a Christian, but their spouse didn't. There's teaching for that too. He's like, can't force them to come live the life that you've decided to live. None of that has a conversation around the bonds of marriage as God sees it. It's just a practical reality. If they don't want to live this way, you're not going to force them to do so. But if they're willing to live this way, then let them do it. You don't need to send them away. Stay married, live married, obey the commandments of the Lord, and then let the rest of it work itself out. But he goes on to explain over in verses 32 through 35 of chapter 7 in 1 Corinthians. I want you to be free from concern. One who is unmarried is concerned about the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But one who is married is concerned about the things of the world, how he may please his wife. And his interests are divided. The woman who is unmarried and the virgin is concerned about the things of the Lord, and she may be holy both in body and spirit. But one who is married is concerned about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. This I say to your own benefit, not to put a restraint upon you, but to promote what is appropriate and to secure undistracted devotion to the Lord. That's his purpose in this section of his letter. I don't want you to get distracted, like Martha, being distracted with, well, I've got to worry about this, and so I can't. Nope. Focus on what's important. But we need to understand that with marriage comes natural, righteous, worldly concerns. Not worldly in the way of sinful, as the way it's used in some contexts. In this context, it's just strictly a distinction between spiritual worries and physical worries. Do single people have physical worries? Yes, they do. But they don't have physical worries that are required of them that are distracting in the same way as being a spouse is. Hi, just a quick break in our episode to talk to you about To Be a Handmaid of the Lord Bible Study Guide. The world offers women nothing but conflicting concepts of what it is to be a woman. This impacts the way women, young and old, make decisions. How we make decisions is often based upon how we see ourselves and the purpose we believe we fulfill. Peer pressure works because you aren't certain about who you are or what you want. For women, the world makes it very hard for them to see themselves as being valuable now or in the future. They are told they need to be more of this and less of that, while inside they are struggling to just figure out who they are in the first place. To help women to stop listening to the world, they need to know how God sees them. It all comes back to knowing you are created by God. He created you to do something. The simple truth is, if God intends you to do it, then logically it means that you can. God cares about you and finds you valuable to his service. Whether you're single, married, old, or young, there is work that you can do. Mothers need to help young women to believe this, to own it. Young women living on their own need to believe it and own it. And married women need to believe this and to own it. Give them the knowledge to empower a life-changing awareness of how they fit in the world in which they live. To Be a Handmaid of the Lord Bible Study Guide was written to help women to do this. What difference would it make to your daughter or to you if you were convinced of the truth that God knows your potential, that God has value for you that he sees, and he wants you to see it? He's aware of you personally. Would knowing that God cares what you do and feel make a difference to how you see yourself? The Bible is full of practical examples of this. We're not left to figure it out. To Be a Handmaid of the Lord walks you through lessons that build character while showing you the women in the Bible who also reflect that character. Lots of different women, different situations, but each one of them is like you. And throughout the Bible study, you grow in grace and knowledge through looking at God's Word, what he says you are capable of. If that sounds like a study that would be helpful to you, to your daughter, or to your friends, or to your study group, go to thediligentwoman.com/handmaidbsg. That's handmaid, HANDMAID, B like boy, S like Sam, G like go. thediligentwoman.com/handmaidbsg to get your copy of To Be a Handmaid of the Lord and start studying today. I love how thorough God is in that in the messaging, he doesn't just speak to the husband or to the wife, he speaks to both of them. And that both of them, as a husband and wife, part of what you're supposed to be doing is how to please your spouse. This is something that can become a distraction and keep you from serving the Lord the way you should, but it doesn't have to. You can serve the Lord in the way that you please your spouse. We're going to see that. Those who are good wives and can focus on being what they should be, being in that marriage relationship doesn't stop them from being a good godly woman. But as we all know, we can get all wrapped up in all of the day-to-day things and get distracted just like Martha. And we can forget, okay, I need to also be worried about spiritual things. Yes, I have to take care of my husband. Yes, I have to look out for his needs. It is never a replacement or a trump in front of being obedient to God. And we're going to look at that further when we look at our last married woman in our series in episode 11. So wait for that one. Because a lot of times this has been used as an excuse to go along with anything and everything that a spouse wants because I'm supposed to please them. And God never said that. He says you are to please them. It doesn't mean you do anything and everything, and you certainly can't do anything that goes against the will of God. So we're supposed to be discerning people. And this whole marriage relationship is complicated, and it takes some wisdom. And as we're going to find as we go forward, we need to include God in our process of being a wife, because that's how a woman who fears the Lord manages this worldly endeavor of being married. She manages that with grace and with kindness and wisdom because she's included God in the equation. And we're going to look at all these examples. You're going to see women with different personalities, women with very different types of husbands. You know, it's really an amazing thing. If you go and you look, you've got some husbands who are very adoring, very good husbands, and then you have other husbands who are not very good husbands. I can think of poor Michal, Saul's daughter. The poor woman, she's in love with David. She's handed to David as a wife, but for Saul's political purposes, not because she loves David and that's what her father wants for her, but because Saul wants to use her to have access to David because he's trying to kill David. So he's using his daughter as a political tool, and then David is forced to run for his life, and he is gone for a number of years. And because he's gone, then Saul again takes his daughter and gives her to another man. And then David comes back home, and if you do the math, it's about 10 years later, something like that. And he comes back home, and he goes and he wants his wife. His wife is married to another man, and in this time she's now married to this man who so adores her that he runs after her and is in tears because he's losing her. But David comes to claim what is his. And he comes and he gets his wife and he takes her. But Michal never had a chance to be married really in a good marriage, a good relationship. And then she goes on and she becomes bitter, and she's watching David. She doesn't think he's kingly, and she mocks him for his joy at the return of the Ark of the Covenant. And because of her attitude about his spiritual reaction to the Lord's Ark of the Covenant coming back to the people, because of her negative reaction and what that says about her thought about David, the Bible tells us she never had children, which means they were never together again as a husband and wife should be. Whatever relationship she had wanted in the beginning when she loved him when they were younger is gone. And David plays a part in that. Saul plays a part in that. And so we're given these views of married women in different circumstances. And unfortunately, Michal is not a good example for us. She allowed her bitterness to get in the way. She didn't focus on being spiritual. She focused on what was kingly, what was important, and what was prideful. And she lost a lot because of it. And then you have other husbands like Elkanah with Hannah, who is adoring to her and just wants her to be happy and cares for her, despite, he's got these other issues with the other wife and all of that, but his relationship with Hannah is adoring. And there are others that are that way. With Isaac and Rebecca, they so enjoy each other that they can't keep their hands off each other. They're nuzzling and cuddling so much that no one would ever question whether or not they were married. They can't hide the fact that they're married, even though they've told people that they're brother and sister. They can't hide the lie because they're affectionate with one another. And so we see all these different aspects of marriage and how people handled things, and we're going to get a view of some Proverbs 31 women in different situations and what that can look like to us, because not every one of us has exactly the same scenarios. The beauty of it is, though, God understands all of the scenarios. I may not have to go through exactly the same things that you go through, but God understands what I've been through, and He knows how to help me. And He knows what you're going through, and He knows how to help you. So this lovely relationship of marriage that is right and God created and provided for us in this life for the protection and the blessings and the lessons it gives us to understand God. We get all of those things from marriage. It's a good thing, but it can be a distraction. And so for us, going forward, is to look at these different married women and learn how to be a woman of valor who doesn't allow our marriages to be a distraction from serving the Lord, but instead a vehicle in which we do serve Him. Because that's what the woman in Proverbs 31 shows us. It's not the only relationship in which she serves Him. She has several relationships where she reflects being a godly woman towards people outside of her home and those inside of her home. So join me for the next few episodes where we're gonna look at those women. Just kind of as a heads up, we're gonna look at Eve, the woman who was the first everything related to women. We're gonna look at her. We're gonna look at Sarah, because we are told back over in 1 Peter 3 to look at her as a guide, and we are to be her daughters, to look to her. And I will say again, that's not limited to women who are married. All women should look to Sarah and learn from Sarah. But as married women, we particularly can learn from her because she was married to Abraham and what they dealt with. We're going to look at Abigail, and then the last married woman we're going to look at is Sapphira. And we are going to learn from her, and she's going to be our one standout that is not a woman of valor in the moment she fails, because she allows herself to be distracted from serving the Lord by serving something else, and from the appearances in the story, she's serving her marriage. The two of them are in concert on a different level than focused just on the spiritual things, and it becomes a distraction, and it ends up making a huge impact on her world. And so we're going to look at those women, and then we'll finish up the season with a look at all of these things and tie a nice bow on it and look at what woman's all is and what that looks like for every one of us, no matter what our relationship status is in this life. So we're going to tie all that up in the last episode. So I hope that you find this encouraging. I hope that you can see in 1 Corinthians 7 that neither is being married more holy than being single, nor is it more sinful because there's worldly worries. It is just a statement of fact that you have worries that the single woman doesn't have. She's going to have plenty of her own, because as it's pointed out in the beginning of the chapter, those sexual sins are a trouble for everyone. You back right up to 1 Corinthians 6, and Paul talks about what all of these Corinthians had come out of, all of these things that they are not anymore. He says, but such were some of you. Well, a lot of those things on that list were sexual sins. And Corinth came out of them, not because they got married or because they got out of a marriage, but because they obeyed the gospel. They found the truth, and it got them out of those troubles. And again, this is the focus of the chapter. The chapter is not separate from the messaging before it and after it, because Paul is trying to give these people a guide into how to walk daily with the Lord, and to do it without being divisive and without being self-centered, and make sure that they are putting what God wants first. And I hope that this will be an encouragement to you to not see a burden because of marriage, but also to not make it where it's higher than because you're married. It's just the circumstances you're in, and you can serve the Lord from where you are. You don't have a greater problem to deal with than the single woman. You just have more things that come at you because of the nature of the circumstances. You can handle it just as she can. She can handle it without being married, and you can handle it while being married. That's it. God gave you everything you need, so you can do this. So Lord willing, we will see you in the next episode, where we dive into looking at these married women and how their relationship reflected whether or not they were a woman of valor all the time, woman of valor sometimes, and how their marriages maybe put a hiccup in their service to the Lord. Because not all of them, it wasn't the marriage part that was a problem. We have several that they had their own issues, and being married may have been the protection that they failed to take advantage of. They didn't use the protection of their husband to be the thing that kept them out of trouble. Instead, they just barreled on their own. And we'll look at that a little more and see how these things play out for those who are married. Again, always lessons for both married and single women, no matter what story we're looking at. But we are going to spend a little time focusing on these married women and what they can teach us about being a woman of valor. So we will see you then. Bye. Thanks for joining me today on the Diligent Woman podcast. Please subscribe to be notified of new episodes and share those with your friends. Until next time, enjoy.